Well, I'm very honored to have as my guest today Lee Butler, retired United States Air Force four-star general. Before retiring in 1994, Lee Butler had a most amazing career, a rated pilot, navigator, parachutist with over 3,000 hours of flying time in 15 types of aircraft, including combat in Vietnam. He served 3 tours in the Pentagon, commanded 2 B-52 wings, was the Inspector General for the Strategic Air Command. From 1987 to 1991, he served as a deputy and chief strategist and planner for the United States Armed Forces under the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral William Crowe, and General Colin Powell. From this position, he was promoted to his 4th star, named commander of the nation's strategic nuclear forces, where he was responsible for the employment of the nation's nuclear bombers, ballistic missiles, both land and sea-based. He's received outstanding awards and medals, too numerous to mention, but we must say the Bronze Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Legion of Merit with Oak Leaf Cluster. So, in 1999, he became the recipient of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Distinguished Service Leadership Award. I'm proud to claim him as a friend. We're proud to have him as a citizen in California. Retired, he now is the founder of the Second Chance Foundation. So please welcome with me, General Lee Butler. Could you be through everything you've been through and not have more gray hairs? And you still, your face is so relaxed, and you look authentically humble when you had so much power.
2 secrets and 1 trick, I suppose, Dr. Schuller. Secret 1 was to be born from a great gene pool, and if you saw my mom, she is the fountain of youth. Secondly was some advice I received early on, which was be sure and marry above yourself, and I did that very well. My wife of 39 years, Doreen, is here today. I never leave home without her.
Doreen? Doreen, stand. Where?
That's what keeps me young. And the trick, I wrinkle on the inside.
So, you spent some powerful years in Omaha, Nebraska.
I did, Dr. Schuller. The responsibilities that you outlined were unique, extraordinary, and faithful. Only a handful of men have held those responsibilities. And quite frankly, it's my fervent hope that in some future year, no one will have to have those responsibilities.
We have a mutual friend, Mikhail Gorbachev,
yes,
and who was in this church for a morning service a few months ago. And he shares those concerns. The 2 of you share the same views, I'm sure.
We do.
Eliminating nuclear weapons if we possibly can.
We've had the opportunity to talk at length about our deepest feelings and concerns and fears about the responsibilities that we held. Of course, his counterpart was the President of the United States, but for 3 years I was at the other end of that red telephone from the President. You
had a special telephone?
That's correct.
Red?
It was, in fact, red.
And was it a line only to the President of the United States?
That is correct. It is astonishing to imagine now, some 10 years removed from what we call the end of the Cold War. But to think back that there was a time when there were people in my position who 24 hours a day, had a telephone either in their hand or at bedside, and the rule for me and my responsibilities is that I had to be in a position to answer that phone within 3 rings, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow.
I might mention that in the evening the phone was on Doreen's side of the bed because she's a lighter sleeper than I am.
As a Vietnam veteran, you had your share of combat.
I did.
Any comment on that?
Well, I can assure you that there is a corollary to the old expression that there are no atheists in foxholes. There are no atheists in cockpits either. I have about 3,000 hours of piloting time in a variety of different aircraft, Dr. Schuller. Combat flying has been described as hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark terror, and that pretty much describes my experience in Vietnam. But if I could add a thought, whatever the difficulties or the challenges that I face, I have never lost sight of the horrific nature of the war on the ground, or the suffering of our prisoners of war, and perhaps most importantly, the anguish of the families who still have loved ones missing in action. My prayers go out to them daily. The saddest legacy of that war is that it still divides us in too many ways. And my fervent prayer today would be that this nation finally reconcile itself to its experience in Vietnam and properly honor the service and the sacrifice of those who simply answered their nation's call.
Thank you. Great response.
I think that as a nation, we are finally beginning to understand what it means to be in harm's way in a distant and hostile land and to die without the comfort of your loved ones.
Second Chance Foundation,
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I spent most of my career associated with nuclear weapons or war planning or the decision and execution process for those forces. And after several decades, I came to this conclusion. We escaped the Cold War without a nuclear holocaust by some combination of skill, luck, and divine intervention. And I think most likely the latter in greatest measure. In effect, we usurped the Creator's power to decide the fate of mankind. In His infinite wisdom, He has forgiven us this folly and granted us a second chance. And this is a chance that we dare not waste, Dr. Schuller. But it is an enormous challenge. It has both a political and a moral dimension. The moral dimension was brought home to me most directly in the words of General Omar Bradley, a great military leader from World War II. And something like myself, but far more eloquently, he made this observation as he was nearing the end of a long and distinguished career. General Bradley said, "We live in an age of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We've achieved brilliance without wisdom and power without conscience. We've grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living." What a harsh indictment that is. I felt a deep personal obligation to respond to that. And from a personal dimension, as I considered the innate goodness of my wife and the shining integrity of our 2 children and the wondrous innocence of our 4 grandchildren, I was raised in a strong Christian tradition. I was taught that the core of our Christian faith is to love God and one another, to respect life and all of its dimensions. I knew that I had a personal obligation, not to sort of sit in silent acquiescence to this continuing folly, but to speak out, to make known the concerns and the fears that were born of my years in the nuclear arena. And I appreciate the opportunity to share those concerns here today with you and with this audience.
Well, what can we do in America? What can people do in the world? What can we do together to pursue this all-important objective of making sure that our century will, and the future will never see a nuclear bomb dropped? What can we do?
What I have learned over the years is that this is first and foremost in the hands of our political leaders. Now, I don't know how that makes you feel, but that is in fact the truth of the matter.
Sure? Are you sure it's not the Pentagon?
It is in the hands of our civilian political leaders. I can tell you with authority,
You've been
Dr.
in the
Schuller,
Pentagon 3 times, so you know the Pentagon.
I know, I've been to the Pentagon and I know the Pentagon. And I can assure you that ultimately the policies that govern nations with respect to nuclear weapons, whether to acquire them, in what number, how to posture them, and ultimately whether or not to use them, is not in the hands of military officers. It is in, and properly, it is in the hands and in the conscience of civilian leadership. We lived for 40 long and dark years in the presence of the most extreme risk one can imagine. The role of the leadership in those days was to be prepared to respond to the apocalyptic moment when war might come, and then to decide how to respond. That was part of my responsibility. Today, the role of the political leadership is to move heaven and earth to walk us back from that precipice, from that brink of global annihilation. And so, first of all, I would say pray for the political leadership, that they might have the wisdom and the courage to take steps that are required to reduce these forces from their states of hair trigger alert, where they have been now for these many years.
They still are today, hair trigger alert.
We still, both the United States and Russia, have thousands of nuclear warheads on hair trigger alert, ready to respond in a moment's notice.
If one of these missiles landed in downtown LA, would we hear it here at the cathedral?
There would be no cathedral.
We're 30 some miles away.
Dr. Schuller, a 10 megaton bomb, which was sort of the standard during much of the Cold War, creates a crater 6,000 feet across and 175 feet deep. If you were standing in the open 20 miles from the explosion, your clothing would spontaneously catch fire. The trigger for a hydrogen bomb, which is what we have in our arsenals, is an atom bomb. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is the trigger for a hydrogen bomb. We have never understood the apocalyptic destructiveness of nuclear weapons, much less nuclear war. Nuclear war is a raging, insatiable beast whose appetites we pretended to understand, but whose consequences we could never control and have never properly understood.
Pray for the politicians.
Yes.
And General Butler, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for the Second Chance Foundation. Anything you can do.
Thank you, Dr. Schuller.
And God loves you, and so do I.
Thank you, Dr. Schuller.
Your faith is strong. It shows.
It's an honor to be here, and thank you all. I appreciate it.